Indigenous Rights Radio, because knowledge is power.
Despite being one of the most widespread, persistent, and devastating human rights violations in our world today, violence against women and girls remains largely unreported due to impunity, silence, stigma, and shame, and in some cases, maladministration and negligence by the police and/or other authorities in specific countries. According to UN.org, violence against women and girls manifests itself in one of the following forms: intimate partner violence, sexual violence and harassment, human trafficking, female genital mutilation, and child marriage. In spite of the fact that gender-based violence can happen to anyone, anywhere, there are some specific women and girls who are especially vulnerable. For instance, young girls and older women, migrants, some members of the LGBTQIA+ community, refugees, indigenous women, ethnic minorities, and others. Indigenous women are also at high risk of violence. In June 2022, UN Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women had this to say about Indigenous women. Quote, Indigenous women and girls face very grave, systematic, and continuous acts of violence that permeate every aspect of their lives, while perpetrators enjoy alarming levels of impunity. End quote. For this year's International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women and Children, we remember the suffering of Indigenous Herero and Nama women at the hands of German colonists. We spoke to Sima Luipert from Namibia about how violence from the past can lead to intergenerational trauma.
Thank you very much for asking for this interview. Qinthestile ke to waraga awumqaramiti ayinchano asiramu niti qansatiyesa. My name is Sima Luipert. I'm from the Indigenous Nama community in southern Namibia. I professionally work as a development practitioner. I'm the development director for the Hardap Regional Council. But I was also asked by the Nama leaders who, Nama people stay in most of the region in which I work. So I was requested by them to support them and to advise them on issues around reparations and restorative justice for the genocide committed against the Nama people. So I do that on a voluntary basis, just in a advisory capacity, as not only as a Nama woman, but also because development issues, genocide is at the core of persistent poverty in the region that I work, and that is one of my motivations, that you cannot look at prosperity and building people's livelihoods without understanding the historical background of the community within which you work. So that's basically my background. My great-grandmother, I never really knew her. I was very young. I think she must have passed away when I was maybe around 9 or 10 years old. But we used to visit our grandmother quite often, and she stayed with my grandmother. And I found her to be a very secluded woman. She wasn't, it almost felt to me at the time that she didn't like children. But it is only, when I started thinking through the stories that our grandmother used to tell us at bedtime, that I started to understand that this was a woman who was very traumatized. My great-grandmother survived Shark Island. We heard this through bedtime stories of my grandmother. She was then taken to an area in Caribbean. My grandmother always used to talk about Caribbean And so I thought, they were taken to Karibib itself. But once I started reading, I found out that she was actually taken to a slave labor camp called Okawayo near Karibib. And it is from here that my great-grandmother was rented out as a slave to the new sort of German settlers, while people were in the extermination camps around 1905, 1906. Germany declared certain legal instruments, ordinances, that were used to expropriate all the land of the Nama people. And the new German settlers were settled on this land. And so when Shark Island extermination camp was closed, the prisoners were taken to slave labor camps, and from here they were rented out by the German administration to the settlers. The settlers paid the wages to the administration and not to the slaves. And this is also how my grandmother was born, to the German settler to whom my great-grandmother was rented out. We always used to wonder why my grandmother had straight hair, and she would often say, it's not for children to know. But then later she opened up and said, I'm the child of a German to whom my mother was rented out. She never knew her father. She never knew her father. And that's my story, I guess. Every act of violence that you can ever imagine, happened to them. I mean, my great-grandmother was subjected to scraping of skulls. When the women were at Shark Island concentration camp, it was the women who were brought the heads of as little children, as even infant babies, who were brought these heads, and they had to go through this very traumatizing experience of taking the flesh of these heads. They had to take out the eyes. They had to take out the brains. They had to take off the hair, just everything, so that these skulls would then be polished and put into boxes and shipped to Germany and to other institutions for racial sciences. Now, I don't know what kind of violence, one can imagine more than having to completely scrape the skull of your own family members. This is what was happening at Shark Island. The women were subjected to sterilization, forced sterilization. They were subjected to rape. They were subjected to flogging. It's just unimaginable, the horror that they went through. I see a lot of self-inflicted violence in our communities, self-inflicted violence through alcohol abuse, through drug abuse, through child neglect, extreme levels of poverty, very little sense of integrity, almost hopelessness, as if every dream has been shattered. I see that a lot around me. I see a lot of also sort of a sense of wanting to protect yourself from any external danger. I also sense that quite a bit through, and this protection, self-protection, is through extreme forms of aggression. That is what I see, almost as if people are caught in a very vicious cycle of self-destruction, not knowing really how to come out of it. And I think at the bottom of this is because we don't understand where this comes from. We don't understand. We are ignorant of our own history and what this history has done to us. You must remember that when people were put into concentration camps, all the land was taken. And when they were finally released, especially after 1915, when the British came in, these people were put into native reserves. And the purpose of these native reserves were to keep them as a cheap labor pool where they could not come out of poverty, but just survive. And since then, it seems to me that many Nama communities have become so used to just trying to survive. Because it is almost as if they have accepted that this is their fate, without even understanding how they ended up in these native reserves. And these native reserves have become breeding grounds of self-destruction, unfortunately. And by doing the work that we are doing through advocacy, we try to make people aware of who they are and just, sort of renew the sense of, identity and integrity. That is what we do. That is what at least we try to do. But it's very difficult to undo so much trauma. It's going to take a lot of effort and a lot of focused effort.
For more on the rights of Indigenous peoples, visit cs.org and follow Cultural Survival on Facebook and Twitter.